She won't forget you because you chased her. She won't forget you because you stayed. And she won't forget you because you bled your soul trying to prove it mattered. No, if she remembers you, it'll be for one reason only, because you finally stopped disappearing from yourself. You didn't lose her all at once. It happened slowly. Each time you said yes when your gut whispered no. Each time you smiled through the disrespect. Each time you shrank so she could shine. That's how men vanish. Not loudly, but piece by quiet piece. And one day she looks at you and sees a man she can walk away from. Not because you were weak, but because you made her comfort more important than your character. There's a lie most men carry after heartbreak, that if you leave her alone long enough, she'll miss you. That if you stay silent, she'll feel the absence. But here's the truth most won't tell you. Absence without identity is just emptiness. If you erased yourself in the relationship, your silence after it is just more of the same. She doesn't remember ghosts. Zeno of Citium didn't become immortal because he clung to what was lost. He became immortal because he used the wreckage of his ship as the blueprint for something unshakable. A man who's been destroyed isn't done. He's just dangerous to the version of himself that begged to be loved. You've mistaken your collapse for closure. You've mistaken your silence for strength. But silence, by itself, means nothing. Only when it's backed by transformation does it become unforgettable. Stoicism isn't about holding in the pain. It's about holding your shape while it burns through you. It's about discipline, not denial. Seneca once said, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage, but not the kind of living you've been doing. Not the kind where your breath hides in someone else's approval. No, this is about a different kind of living. The kind where your existence no longer bends to be seen. The kind where your memory lingers, not because you forced her to remember, but because the man you became could no longer be ignored." These 11 steps aren't strategies. They're resurrections. They don't help you win her back. They help you walk back into yourself. Every step is a quiet rebellion against the man you used to be. And if she remembers you one day, it won't be because of what you said. It'll be because your absence started speaking louder than your presence ever did. Now we begin. It didn't start with betrayal. It started with little silences. With that moment, you felt something wasn't right, but stayed quiet to keep the peace. With that look she gave you that twisted your gut, but you smiled anyway. You told yourself you were being strong, that you were being patient, that real love requires sacrifice. But what you were really doing was vanishing. Every time you adjusted yourself to avoid her disapproval, you were teaching her to ignore your depth. You were training her to see you as agreeable, manageable, quiet, not steady, just silent, not composed, just erased. That's how forgettable men are made. Not by failure, but by invisibility. The kind you practice every time you lower your standards to avoid being left. And the tragedy is, you didn't even see it happening because you thought love meant giving and giving and giving. But love without boundaries isn't love, it's erosion. A man who keeps sacrificing his truth becomes a background presence. He's there, but he's not felt. He's close, but not seen. Even your body started to reflect it. Neuroscience has shown what ancient men already felt. Repetitive emotional suppression lowers testosterone. Your voice weakens. Your eyes dim. Your walk loses rhythm. Presence isn't posture, it's internal pressure. When you stop defending your truth, your presence disappears even when your body remains. And maybe that's why it hurt so deeply when she left. Not just because she walked away, but because in your quiet heart, you knew you hadn't truly shown her who you were. Not the man beneath the compromises, not the fire beneath the peacekeeping. She didn't forget you. She never fully saw the you who hid. Respect isn't born from how little you ask. It's forged in what you refuse to tolerate. You don't become unforgettable by making her feel safe at the cost of your soul. You become unforgettable by refusing to be less than who you are, even when silence feels safer. That's the line. That's where presence begins. There's a particular kind of silence that follows the end. It's not cruel. It's not loud. It just is. And that silence drives men mad. They replay every word, every pause, every gesture she made before she left, looking for clues, looking for closure. But what they never ask is the hardest question of all. Was I ever fully there to begin with? Men interpret her silence as rejection, as punishment, as proof that they were never enough. But often it's not that. It's reflection. It's the echo of how emotionally absent you were from your own story. You stood beside her, but you weren't fully standing in yourself. You listened, but you didn't speak your need. You stayed, but you stopped showing up with soul. Silence after a breakup isn't some mystical female tactic. It's the natural result of emotional neutrality. And neutrality is what happens when a man spends too long walking on eggshells, dimming his light, softening his edge. You weren't remembered because you diluted every version of yourself that had weight. We think presence is about being around, but real presence demands selfhood. It demands contrast. It demands a man who takes up spiritual space, not just physical one. And without that contrast, the silence that follows isn't haunting. It's just quiet, because there was no gravity to leave behind. Stoicism teaches us that silence isn't suffering, it's information. And in this case, her silence is showing you what you refused to see while you were still there. That your absence doesn't hurt, because your presence never pierced. This is the hardest mirror, that you weren't erased after the breakup. You were never fully imprinted. That's why silence cuts so deep. It doesn't reject you. It reveals the emotional void you normalized. And until you confront that, no amount of waiting, disappearing, or retreating will make her remember. Because she's not responding to your absence. She's responding to the emptiness that came before it. There's a moment after it all collapses when you feel the pull to speak, to explain, to prove that you mattered. But that's not strength, that's residue. That's the ghost of a man still needing validation from the woman who forgot how to see him. The truth is, silence, when it comes from a man who is rebuilding, is louder than any apology, louder than any last word. Doing nothing is not the same as being passive. It's not waiting, it's not hiding. It's disappearing into action, the kind of action no one sees, the kind that doesn't post progress or seek sympathy, the kind of action that turns pain into shape, into depth, into stillness. Because the man who changes his reflection in silence becomes unrecognizable to the version of her that left. Zeno didn't start a school of philosophy with a crowd. He walked the ruins of his life in solitude and chose to become the lesson. He didn't argue, he embodied, and that's what you do now. Not to get her back, not to teach her a lesson, but to become the kind of man whose absence has weight, not because of drama, but because of discipline. You don't chase her memory, you shape your soul. And if she remembers you, let it be for the silence that didn't beg. Let it be for the calm that didn't collapse. Let it be for the man who didn't reach back, but instead walked forward into something so whole, even her silence had to look twice. You don't need to announce your transformation, you need to live it. The man who does nothing while becoming everything is not forgotten. He's felt, even in the room he never re-enters, even in the message he never sends, especially then, because she can sense it, that somewhere out there, you didn't flinch. You didn't fold. You didn't need to be remembered. You just became unforgettable. The man who wants to be remembered often becomes the easiest to forget, because memory doesn't respond to effort, it responds to essence. And when your essence is built around being seen, not being sovereign, it dissolves the moment attention fades. That's the trap. The more you try to stay in her thoughts, the more she senses your absence from your own center. You don't leave fingerprints on a woman's soul by grabbing at her memory. You do it by becoming the kind of man who no longer needs to be seen to know he exists. The moment your presence starts depending on her reaction, she stops respecting it, because it's no longer presence, it's performance. And performance always fades. Behavioral psychology calls it reactance. People pull away from what clings, they distrust what chases, and they forget what overstates itself. If you try to remind her of your worth, you're already confessing that you doubt it, and she feels that, deeply, not through words, but through vibration, through how your silence still asks to be acknowledged. You weren't made to orbit someone else's validation. You weren't made to become more visible by becoming more desperate. You were made to hold your ground so deeply, so calmly, that even your withdrawal speaks of self-trust. And that's what stays with her. Not because you tried to stay, but because your departure was filled with dignity. To be remembered, stop needing to be. Let go of the craving to linger in her story. She'll remember you when your presence no longer begs, when your distance is not punishment, but peace. That's when memory turns into myth, not because you forced it, but because the echo of your calm was louder than all your words combined. Boundaries don't speak loudly. They don't scream, threaten, or chase. They simply appear, like quiet lines drawn in the sand. And when a man starts living by those lines, the world takes notice. not because he forced it to, but because he finally stopped asking for permission to exist. She may not comment, she may not react, but she will feel the shift, because for the first time, your choices are no longer tethered to her mood, her approval, or her attention. And that absence of need is what resets the dynamic, not in defiance, but in definition. A man who sets boundaries is not telling the world who can't come in. He's reminding himself who he is. Every no becomes a yes to his own dignity. Every refusal becomes a quiet ceremony for the self he almost forgot. You're not punishing her by walking away from what disrespects you. You're honoring the man who stayed too long. Picture this, a hallway of open doors, and you, calm, still, composed, walking past all of them, not because you couldn't enter, but because none of them lead to peace. That's what your boundaries look like now, not barricades, but silent signals that say, I choose stillness over noise. I choose respect over recognition. She may not understand it. She may never say a word, but something in her will notice that you no longer flinch, that you no longer chase, that you no longer reach out when your soul says retreat. And that's where memory is born, in the clarity of your restraint, in the steadiness of your standards, in the unspoken command of a man who finally remembered where his worth begins. After the fall, most men run, not with their legs, but with distraction. They bury themselves in noise, in work, in new faces, in numb rituals that keep them from hearing the only voice that matters, their own. Because sitting in the wreckage without reaching for escape, that takes more courage than chasing any woman ever did. But here's the truth. Without an internal narrative, a man becomes reactive. He lets others define his story. He lives in echoes, not in intention. And that's why the pain lingers. Not because she left, but because you never built a place inside yourself to hold the loss with honor. You kept waiting for her to see you, to validate the weight of your love. But selfhood isn't built in someone else's gaze. It's carved in solitude. Marcus Aurelius didn't write to be admired. He wrote to survive himself. He journaled truths no one else would ever read, because he understood. What's not spoken still shapes you, and what you don't put into language festers into confusion. You don't need her to read your pain. You need to write it until it no longer owns you. Your new anchor isn't found in applause, in closure, or in her regrets. It's found in the way you tell your own story from this moment on. Do you keep calling yourself the man she abandoned? Or do you begin speaking as the man who returned to his own silence with discipline and depth? Talk to the man you are becoming. Write to the man you almost lost. And know this, she may never know the war you fought in your own chest. But you will, and that is enough. Because when a man builds a narrative rooted in sovereignty, not suffering, his memory stops depending on anyone else's remembrance. He becomes his own monument, quiet, unshakable, whole. You don't need to prove anything anymore. Not to her, not to the world, not even to the version of you that begged to be seen. What you need is to become someone that no story can replicate, someone whose silence says more than their presence ever did. That's what makes a man unforgettable. Not his gifts, not his promises, but his refusal to be anything less than whole. There's a man she'll remember, not for what he said, but for how he left, not in anger, not in pride, but in the kind of stillness that made the air change when he was gone. The kind of presence that, once removed, leaves an echo that lingers longer than any goodbye. You don't create that by fighting. You create that by becoming so deeply aligned with your purpose. She realizes, no one else moved like you. No one else breathed with that kind of restraint. This is what Stoicism means at its highest form. Not coldness, not distance, but radiant detachment. You don't leave to punish. You leave because returning would cost you your soul, and you finally remember what that soul is worth. You stop trying to control what she feels, what she sees, what she thinks when your name comes up. And instead, you live deeply, quietly, unapologetically. Become the man who doesn't haunt her out of bitterness, but out of gravity. The man whose memory weighs something because his life took on a shape that no one else could wear. That's the final step. Not noise, not closure, not vengeance, just evolution. So complete, it speaks for itself. You walk, not to be seen walking, but because staying still would mean erasing yourself again, and you've already lived that once. Never again. If you want to be unforgettable, stop behaving like a man who was easy to erase. It was never your silence that made her forget. It was the way you emptied yourself before you ever walked away. The way you softened your edges until there was nothing left to hold on to. And now, the only way forward isn't to get her back. It's to get yourself back. Fully, quietly, permanently. Zeno of Citium didn't search the wreckage for pieces to rebuild what was lost. He built something new, something no storm could take again. From failure, he shaped philosophy. From absence, he created memory. You are that man now. Not because you were chosen, but because you were broken, and chose not to stay that way. Marcus Aurelius didn't wonder what others thought of his silence. He simply lived by it. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be, he wrote. Be one. That's your task now. Not to be remembered, but to become someone memory can't ignore. Let her remember you, not for the noise you made, not for the messages you sent, but for the peace that followed your exit, for the man you became when no one was watching, for the calm so complete, even her silence had to whisper your name. That is how you make her never forget you again. You vanish from her world because you finally arrived in your own.